Welcome back to Music Theory Logic. Andrew here. I wanted to come and tell you about some different projects I've been doing for the studio and some new skills I'm adding to my repertoire. You may have seen my new desk. So I got a super sweet Argosy desk, which is allowing me to hook up all my gear. And one thing that I'm building into my workflow is a patch bay. If you're not familiar with what this is it basically allows you to rewire the order, your signal path of the stuff that you want to plug in without having to go behind the units and change them. Now, I don't have a ton of outboard gear, so I'm not going to need all 24 slots of this. However, this is something that I really wish I did a long time ago because it's going to make me just a lot more efficient. So I have two outboard synthesizers and this outboard electric piano, this Rhodes behind me, all of which put out an output that I could record. All right, so in the past, I would take the Moog, I would plug that into, let's say, my distressor, then I would plug that into my Apollo, my interface, or whatever order, and I would do it just for that instrument. But I've always wanted to be able to come into my studio, turn everything on, go over to the Moog, hear it, have everything set up. So what I'm doing is I'm going to set up this patch bay, and basically what that's going to mean is that every output that's coming out of my studio and every input from my Apollo or other processing units are going to be wired out up here. So what that means is that at the front, I will already have things set up. So I'll take a patch cable and I'll connect it, let's say the output of my distressor into the input of my Apollo. So that would be one route. Now, these have different settings, right? You've got normal, half normal, and through. What normal means is that it's going to automatically connect from the output to the input without you creating a patch. So unless you plug it in separately, it's going to automatically be going. I'm going to use that principle for my instruments. So I'm working with an Apollo 8. It's called an Apollo 8 because it has 8 ins and 8 outs. So I'm going to have those 8 inputs wired up. Then my synthesizers are going to be wired up, going into those Apollo inputs in a normal setting. So without me plugging it in, I just turn everything on. If I play the Moog, I'm going to hear the Moog. Let's say I want to send the Moog through the distressor. I plug Moog into distressor, into Apollo, and I'm done. And by plugging into that patch, I am separating the connection. So in other words, the normal going from the top to the bottom isn't going to happen. Now, those of you that are super accomplished audio engineers will probably pick up on the fact that I am not an audio engineer. Technically, I wouldn't proclaim myself to be an audio engineer. I'm a trained musician. I've done a lot of different stuff as a musician, and one of the things that being a musician forced me to do is learn how to record myself. I was in a band setting when I was writing music for television. Being able to record instruments is really important. Working for artists where you're writing music and they're, say, recording vocals are important. So all my audio engineering is really something I learned on the job in essence. So the next thing I want to explain that I've been up to is in order to plug all my stuff into this, I obviously need a ton of cables. All right, now these are all TRS cables, tip ring sleeve. They send a balanced signal. Not going to get into the nitty gritty of that, but basically I need a lot more cables. I have a ton of cables over my years of making music, but I don't have one cable for every piece of gear that I have, and you're probably out there in the same boat. Now, post-COVID and even before COVID, buying cables that are made is quite expensive. For years, people have been telling me to try to make my own pedals or my own cables, and I had been sort of not doing that because I was always stalled at the word soldering. So I had never soldered anything. I only consulted YouTube videos. It was really frustrating. The first day, I made one working cable in something like 6 hours. Burning myself, really tough. But then the next day I made 2 working cables in 4 hours. And yesterday I made a couple cables that I felt like are pretty clean, and I did each of them in 20 minutes. So It's a pretty quick thing to learn how to do. In order to do what I'm doing, you would need some bulk cable. So it comes on these rounds. This is 500 feet of TRS cable. Now I got 3.5 millimeter. That's small. It's essentially the thickness of like a headphone cable. It can carry the same amount of information. It requires a kind of smaller movement, right? The cables are perhaps a little harder to solder. But the advantage to this is that you can fit more cables in less space. And since I'm using these cables to wire up inside this desk, I don't want them to be super thick cables. Just save space. In addition to the bulk cable, you'll need connectors. They come, and again, I'm building TRS, so that stands for tip, ring, sleeve. Tip, the ring, the sleeve. It looks like a guitar cable. If you look at your guitar cable, you'll notice that there's only 2 spots. This is divided into 3 spots. 1, 2, 3. All right, not to get into the full engineering of this because I'm not qualified to explain it to you, but there's a ground and there's a plus and a minus, if I'm saying that correctly. For my brain, I prepped a cable here. There's basically, if you look inside your cable, there's a red, a black, and a unshielded metal. That metal is called the ground on this cable. That ground is going to go into this main section. All right, like so. I've been doing the red to the hot, so that's the one on the left. Now, the first thing I discovered was that it matters a lot to do it in the right order. So I had to plug red into the left one, black into the right one, and repeat. When I didn't do that, it didn't work. Again, process of elimination for me, and I can't explain why it works that way, but I can give you the encouragement that if I can do this, you can do this. All you need is, again, bulk cable. You'll need wire strippers. Get these at any Home Depot. Helping hands are super helpful, so this holds the cable in place. You'll need a soldering iron. I have a butane soldering iron, this Bernzomatic. It's working fine for me. I would like to get a high-end electrical solder gun, and I'm going to sometime in the future. And then finally, you'll need heat shrink. Now, the heat shrink, basically, you put it around the cable, and then you heat it up, and it seals it. So here's a finished one. If you look right here, there's a seam. If you look on the cables that you've bought, you'll notice like all of them, especially nicer cables. Like if you have a Mogami cable or like one of those Monster, like the gold, their nicest cables, you'll notice that there's a bunch of little things here. What that does is it prevents moisture from getting into the connection. And then of course you'll need some sort of solder. I got this stuff from Home Depot. It's electrical solder. And again, this is all working quite well for me. It's taking some time because I need something like 24 cables in total, but I'm about halfway there, and I'm going to get back to it today. Let me know if you have any questions or comments below. Once again, this is a musician, not an electrical engineer, making cables, and if I can do it, you can do it. Like a lot of the stuff that I've talked about in these videos, your road to becoming whatever kind of artist or music person that you want to be will introduce you to different skill sets that you may not have even anticipated, but that's one of the fun things. And every skill set that we add, the more we can ultimately do. So I mentioned like with my computer video, I wish I knew not to upgrade. I basically had like no choice but to go down the rabbit hole and understand what had happened to my computer and how to fix a Mac from the most sort of drastic repair possible in order for me to get back to work. That made me so much more competent in my actual system, and that skill is going to pay dividends for many, many years to come. Another skill that I just had to develop was mixing. I didn't really like go specifically to school to become an audio mixer, but if you're making music on your own, or you're recording your friends, or you're writing music for someone else, you want to make that music sound as good as possible, and ultimately that's going to lead you to some mixing. So the more skills you develop, the more you can apply them in the future. And with soldering, I'm really excited to start to be able to repair some of the gear that I have. So on my distressor, it works perfectly, but it's one of the sets of lights is blown, so that part doesn't light up. It just skips that section. It's something like I don't even know, 12 to 16, so a few lights. And when I contacted the company asking about the light, they said they'd send me the piece for just the shipping for like $1. And it was super simple if I knew how to solder, at which point I was like, oh, well, I'm fine with the light not working because I don't even want to get into that. But again, that's something I feel like I can now do. So once again, my name's Andrew. If this stuff helps you, you would help me out by subscribing to the channel. Constantly trying to make videos teaching you stuff about music theory, production, the mental side of music, and just trying to connect with other people out there making music. So if you have some cool stuff that you want us to check out, leave that in the comments. Have a wonderful day, and I'll see you next time. Cheers.